Please, sir. I'm so sorry. And my mommy, she's really sick and she couldn't come, so I came instead.
6 years old, standing in a mafia boss's office with a crumpled resume, begging him to give her dying mother a chance. He looked at her and said 2 words. Get out. What happened next will change everything you think you know about second chances. Viktor Kozlov didn't become the most feared crime boss in the city by having a conscience. Built his empire on fear, ruthlessness, and the kind of cold calculation that made grown men wet themselves at the mention of his name. He was a ghost story parents told to keep their kids in line. A monster in an expensive suit. His legitimate front? A sprawling security consulting firm that occupied the top 3 floors of the Ashford Tower. The 18th floor was where he conducted actual business, the kind that left no paper trail. That's where Marco, his right-hand man, filtered through job applications, selecting candidates who could be useful in ways that had nothing to do with their listed qualifications. Tuesday morning started like any other. Viktor sat behind his desk, reviewing shipment manifests that detailed considerably more than office supplies. The November rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city below into a blur of gray and steel. Marco knocked twice before entering, the signal that meant routine interruption, nothing urgent. Boss, there's someone here for the receptionist interview. Viktor didn't look up from his papers. Then why are you bothering me with it? This one's different. Something in Marco's tone made Viktor's eyes lift. His enforcer looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight like a man who'd just witnessed something that didn't compute with his understanding of the world. In 15 years, Viktor had never seen Marco rattled. Different how? Before Marco could answer, a small voice piped up from the doorway. Please, sir. My mommy really needs this job. Viktor's head snapped toward the sound. Standing in his doorway, dwarfed by the massive frame and looking impossibly small against the backdrop of his intimidating office, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her red dress was clean but worn, the fabric thin from too many washings. Braids framed a face that was all wide brown eyes and determination that sat strangely on someone so young. In her tiny hands, she clutched a manila folder like it contained the secrets of the universe. Who the hell? Viktor started, his voice sharp as a blade. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, the girl interrupted, her words tumbling out in a rush. Mommy had an interview today, but she's too sick to come and we really need this job, and I know she'd be the best worker ever. She's so smart and she works so hard and… Marco. Viktor's voice could have frozen the sun. Explain why there is a child in my office. His enforcer looked genuinely pained. She got past security somehow. Told them she had an interview. By the time anyone realized. I'm not leaving until you read Mommy's resume. The little girl's voice cracked with desperation. She marched forward with the kind of fearless determination that only children and the truly naive possess, placing the folder on Viktor's desk with both hands. Please. She's really good with computers and numbers, and she types really fast, and she promised she wouldn't miss any days once she gets better, I promise. Viktor stared at this child, this impossible, incomprehensible intrusion into his carefully ordered world, and felt something dark and cold settle in his chest. Annoyance, anger at the disruption, disgust at the sentimentality of it all. He picked up the folder with 2 fingers, like it might contaminate him, and let it drop into his waste bin without opening it. I don't hire people out of pity, he said flatly, and I certainly don't conduct business with children. Marco, remove her. The girl's face crumpled. But you didn't even look at it. Mommy worked so hard on that. She stayed up all night making it perfect. And she got so tired, but she said she had to do it right because this was our last chance and… Not my problem. Viktor turned back to his papers, dismissing her existence with the same casual indifference he showed to all inconveniences. There are hundreds of applicants. Your mother is nothing special. She is special. The shout was so sudden, so fierce, that Viktor actually paused. Before we continue, if you're impressed by this little girl's courage, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. The little girl's hands were balled into fists, her whole body shaking. Whether from fear or fury, he couldn't tell. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice didn't waver. She's the best mommy in the whole world, and she takes care of me even when she's so sick she can barely stand up, and she never complains, and she always makes sure I eat even when there's not enough food, and she tells me stories every night to make me feel safe, and she's special, and you're just a mean man who doesn't care about anybody." The office went silent except for the child's ragged breathing. Victor looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, at the fierce love burning in those young eyes, at the way she stood her ground despite being absolutely terrified, her legs trembling beneath that worn red dress, at the desperate, futile courage of a child trying to save her mother with nothing but words and hope. Something twisted in his chest, something he didn't recognize and didn't like. "Get her out," he said quietly. "Now." Marco moved forward, but the girl backed away, still crying, still staring at Victor with a look that mixed heartbreak and accusation in equal measure. "I hope you never know what it's like," she whispered, her voice breaking. "To love someone so much it hurts, and not be able to help them. I hope you never feel this bad." Then Marco's hand was on her shoulder, gently but firmly guiding her toward the door. She didn't resist this time. Just let herself be led away, her small shoulders shaking with sobs that echoed down the hallway long after the door closed. Victor sat perfectly still in the silence that followed. "Want me to check the security footage?" Marco asked carefully. "See how she got past the front desk. Just go." After Marco left, Victor tried to return to his work. The shipment manifests blurred in front of his eyes. He kept seeing that little girl's face, kept hearing her broken whisper. The rain against the windows seemed suddenly louder, each drop like an accusation. This was ridiculous. He was Viktor Kozlov. He'd ordered executions, destroyed lives, built his empire on the ruins of lesser men's dreams. The tears of one insignificant child shouldn't affect him in the slightest. But when he looked at his waste bin, at that folder lying on top of the other discarded papers, his hand moved before his brain could stop it. The resume was printed on cheap paper, the kind that came in bulk from discount stores. But it was meticulously formatted, every line perfect, every detail carefully listed. Sarah Mitchell, the header read. Bachelor's degree in computer science from a state school. 5 years of experience in data management. Previous employer, Redwood Financial Group. Victor's eyes narrowed. He knew Redwood. They'd gone under 8 months ago, caught in an embezzlement scandal that had nothing to do with him, but had benefited his operations considerably. Their entire staff had been let go overnight. At the bottom of the resume in smaller text. Hardworking, reliable, and dedicated. Willing to work any hours necessary. Quick learner with strong attention to detail. Nothing special. Nothing that stood out from the hundreds of other applications they processed weekly. Just another desperate person in a city full of them. So why couldn't he stop thinking about it? The afternoon dragged. Victor conducted 2 meetings with his usual efficiency, made 3 decisions that would shift thousands of dollars in his direction, and approved a shipment that would have landed any legitimate businessman in federal prison for life. He did all of this on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. That little girl's face. Those words. The way she'd stood there, terrified but unshaking, fighting for her mother with nothing but her voice. When had he last seen that kind of love? That kind of pure, selfless devotion? Never. That's when. In his world, love was a weakness. Sentiment was a liability. You cared about people, and people became leverage, weapons to be used against you. He'd learned that lesson early and hard, and he'd built his entire existence around it. But there was something about the child's courage that wouldn't let him go. At 7 p.m., long after his legitimate employees had gone home, Victor found himself doing something completely inexplicable. He called Marco into his office and handed him the resume. Find out where they live. Marco's eyebrows rose incrementally, the equivalent of shocked surprise in his usually stoic features. Boss, you heard me. We doing damage control. Think the kid might talk. Victor almost laughed at that. Damage control. As if a 6-year-old story would matter to anyone who mattered. As if this had anything to do with protecting his interests. Just find the address. 20 minutes later, Victor was sitting in the back of his Mercedes, watching the city lights blur past through tinted windows. The address Marco had found was in Riverside, the kind of neighborhood where hope went to die slowly. Broken streetlights, barred windows, the acrid smell of urban decay seeping through even the car's filtered air. You sure about this, boss? Marco asked from the driver's seat. Victor didn't answer because he wasn't sure about anything. This was irrational, dangerous in its unpredictability. He'd built his empire on calculated risks, never impulsive decisions driven by. What? Guilt? Curiosity? Some twisted need to understand why a child's words had crawled under his skin? The apartment building was exactly what he'd expected. Crumbling brick facade. Flickering neon sign advertising hourly rates like this was some kind of budget motel. Graffiti crawling up the walls like poisonous vines. The kind of place where people came to disappear or to give up. They found apartment 3C on the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled like mildew and desperation. Someone was shouting behind one door. A baby crying behind another. The building's heating system rattled and wheezed like it might give up at any moment. Victor stood in front of the door marked 3C, his hand raised to knock, wondering what the hell he was doing. Before he could make contact, the door opened. The little girl stood there in pajamas now, her eyes widening with recognition and something that might have been hope or might have been fear. Before she could speak, a voice called weakly from inside. "Emma, who is it, sweetheart?" The girl, Emma, looked torn between slamming the door in Victor's face and letting him in. He could see her weighing her options with a seriousness that seemed impossibly old for her age. "It's okay," Victor heard himself say, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "I just want to talk to your mother." Emma studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly and stepped back. The apartment was tiny. One room that functioned as living room, kitchen, and sleeping area. A threadbare couch that had seen better decades. A kitchenette with appliances that belonged in a museum. But it was clean. Meticulously clean. Like someone had scrubbed away the poverty with pure determination, even though it always came back. On the couch, wrapped in a blanket that looked older than Emma, was Sarah Mitchell. Victor had seen a lot of people in his life. Victims, enemies, employees, lovers who wanted his money more than him. He'd trained himself to assess threats, to calculate value, to look at human beings as chess pieces on his personal board. But when Sarah Mitchell looked up at him, every calculation in his head short-circuited. She was dying. That much was obvious. Her skin had the translucent quality of someone whose body was consuming itself. Dark circles shadowed eyes that were bright with fever. Her hands trembled as she tried to sit up straighter, tried to compose herself even though every movement clearly cost her. But beneath the illness, Victor could see the person she'd been. Delicate features. Intelligence in those fever-bright eyes. A quiet strength that refused to be extinguished even as her body failed. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "Emma, oh God, you didn't go to that interview, did you?" The realization hit her like a physical blow. "Baby, what did you do?" Emma rushed to her mother's side. "I tried, Mommy. I tried to give him your resume, but he threw it away and—" "I owe you an apology," Victor interrupted, surprised by his own words. "Your daughter was very brave this morning. She fought for you the way any mother would hope." Sarah's eyes met his, and he saw recognition dawn. "You're him, the man from the interview." "Oh God." She tried to stand, swayed dangerously, and sank back onto the couch. "I'm so sorry, I never meant for Emma to bother you. I was supposed to go, but I woke up and I couldn't. I can't believe she did that. Please don't." "Stop." Victor raised a hand. "I'm not here to threaten you or your daughter." "Then why are you here?" That was the question, wasn't it? Why was he here, in this tiny apartment that smelled like lavender and sickness, looking at a dying woman and her brave little girl, feeling things he'd spent decades learning not to feel? He didn't have a good answer. Sarah Mitchell was watching him with a strange expression. Not fear exactly, though he could see the tension in her body. Something else, like she was seeing past the expensive suit and the dangerous reputation to something underneath. "Emma, honey," Sarah said softly, never taking her eyes off Victor. "Can you go into the bedroom for a minute? Take your coloring books." "But Mommy." "It's okay, sweetheart. I promise." Emma looked between them uncertainly, then gathered her things and disappeared through a curtain that separated the sleeping area. Victor could see her shadow on the other side, small and still. She wasn't coloring. She was listening. "How long?" Victor asked quietly. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Direct. "I appreciate that." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "The doctors gave me 6 months. That was 4 months ago. I've been trying to get treatment, but insurance won't cover the experimental therapy I need, and the clinical trials have waiting lists a mile long. I'm not on any of them." "Why not?" "Because they take people with support systems. Backup caregivers for their kids. I don't have that. Emma's father left before she was born. No family. No safety net. Just me." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. So I've been trying to work, trying to save money for her future. But I can't keep any job because I keep getting sick. The interview today was my last shot. I'd applied everywhere else. Victor processed this information with the same analytical mind that had built his empire. A woman alone. No resources. No options. Dying slowly while trying to ensure her daughter's survival. It should have meant nothing to him. In his world, people died all the time. Quickly or slowly, violently or quietly. Their stories didn't matter. Their struggles were just background noise. But something about Sarah Mitchell, about the quiet dignity with which she faced her death, about the fierce love that still burned in her fever-bright eyes when she looked toward the curtain hiding her daughter, struck something in Victor that he'd thought was long dead. What if I could help? Sarah's expression shifted to suspicion immediately. No offense, but men like you don't offer help without wanting something in return. I may be dying, but I'm not that desperate. Men like me. Victor felt his lips twitch into something that might have been a smile under different circumstances. What do you know about men like me? I watch the news. I see what kind of businesses operate out of that building. I may be sick, but I'm not stupid. Sarah's voice gained strength. So if you're here thinking that Emma and I will be some kind of charity project you can feel good about, or worse, something you can exploit. I'm not a good man, Ms. Mitchell. Victor cut through her building tirade with quiet certainty. You're right about that. But your daughter made me remember something I'd forgotten. What's that? That courage exists outside my world. That love can be fierce without being violent. That some people fight battles far harder than any I've ever faced. And they do it without weapons or power or anything except sheer determination. Sarah stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. I don't understand. Neither do I. Victor pulled out his phone. But I'm going to make some calls. There's a specialist at Johns Hopkins who owes me a favor. He runs a clinical trial for exactly the kind of cancer you have. I told you I don't have the support. Emma will have support. Victor's voice took on the commanding tone that made his enemies obey without question. You'll be admitted to the trial. The treatment will be covered. And while you're recovering, your daughter will be cared for by qualified professionals. Not strangers. People I trust. Why? Sarah's voice cracked. Why would you do this? Victor thought about that little girl standing in his office, tears streaming down her face, fighting for her mother with nothing but words. He thought about the resume he'd thrown away without looking. He thought about all the years he'd spent building walls around his heart, convincing himself that feeling nothing was the same as being strong. Because your daughter walked into the lion's den and called me a mean man who doesn't care about anybody. She was right. But maybe. He paused, feeling ridiculous even saying it. Maybe I don't want to be right anymore. Silence filled the tiny apartment. Through the curtain, he could hear Emma's soft breathing. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the city's perpetual soundtrack of suffering. I can't pay you back, Sarah finally said. Whatever this costs, I'll never be able to repay it. I'm not asking you to. Then what do you want? Victor looked at her, really looked at her. At the strength it must have taken to keep fighting when her body was giving up. At the love that kept her conscious and functional when she should have been hospitalized weeks ago. At the quiet grace with which she faced her mortality while ensuring her daughter never saw her fear. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wanted something that had nothing to do with power or profit or control. He wanted to matter. To someone. In a way that didn't involve fear or obligation or calculation. I want you to get better, he said simply. That's all. Sarah's eyes searched his face, looking for the trap, the hidden angle, the inevitable betrayal that people like her learned to expect from people like him. Victor let her look. He had nothing to hide because he barely understood his own motivations himself. Finally, she nodded. Just once. A tiny gesture that felt like surrendering to something neither of them fully understood. Okay. That single word changed everything. Over the next 3 days, Victor moved with the same ruthless efficiency that had built his empire. Except this time he was building something different. He called Dr. Richard Chun at Johns Hopkins, cashed in a favor from an operation that had saved the doctor's brother from a very ugly situation 3 years ago. Chun agreed to review Sarah's medical records and expedite her admission to his trial. He arranged for Emma to be cared for by Maria Santos, one of the few people in his organization who had an actual soul. Maria had worked as his housekeeper for a decade, knew enough to keep her mouth shut, and had raised 6 kids of her own. She agreed immediately when Victor explained the situation in the vaguest possible terms. He covered the costs, medical treatment, transportation, housing near the hospital, everything. The money was nothing, a rounding error in his operations. But the way Sarah looked at him when he explained the arrangements, like he'd just offered her the moon, that was everything. 4 days after Victor had thrown away her resume, Sarah Mitchell was admitted to Johns Hopkins. Emma stayed with Maria in Baltimore, close enough to visit her mother daily. Victor told himself he'd done his good deed, satisfied whatever strange compulsion had overtaken him, and could return to his normal life. He lasted 6 days. On the 7th day after Sarah's admission, Victor found himself making excuses to Marco about needing to check on business connections in Baltimore. Marco, to his credit, said nothing about the fact that they had no business connections in Baltimore. Just drove Victor to the hospital and waited in the car. Sarah was in a private room. Victor had insisted on that. The treatment had already started, and the effects were visible. She looked worse than before, if that was possible. Pale as death. So thin the hospital gown seemed to swallow her. But her eyes were clearer, less fever-bright, and when she saw Victor in the doorway, she smiled. "You came. Just checking on my investment." Victor tried for his usual cold tone and failed miserably. Liar. But Sarah's smile didn't fade. "Emma was just here. She drew you a picture." Sarah held up a piece of construction paper covered in crayon scribbles. Victor could make out stick figures. A tall one in black and a small one in red. Between them, a heart. Something in Victor's chest did something painful and unfamiliar. "She thinks you're her hero," Sarah said softly. "She keeps telling Maria about how you came to save Mommy like a prince in a fairy tale." "I'm nobody's prince." Victor stepped into the room, uncomfortable with the label. "I'm barely anybody's hero. You're hers. And mine." Sarah's voice wavered with exhaustion. "Do you know what it's like? To be dying. To know you're leaving your child alone in the world with no one. And then to have someone appear out of nowhere and offer hope. You're not a good man by your own admission, but you're a good man to us. That's enough." Victor sat in the chair beside her bed. "The doctors say your numbers are improving. The treatment's working faster than they expected." "I know. They can't quite believe it." Sarah's hand moved slightly on the blanket, like she was reaching for something. "They think maybe sheer stubbornness is doing half the work. Turns out having something to live for makes a difference." Her fingers were close to his now. Victor looked at them. Thin, trembling slightly from the medication, marked with 4 punctures. Without thinking, he covered her hand with his. Sarah's breath caught. Her eyes met his, surprised and questioning. "I don't know what I'm doing," Victor admitted quietly. "This isn't something I'm good at. Being human. You're doing fine." Sarah turned her hand under his, their fingers intertwining. "Better than fine." They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just existing in the same space. Outside the window, the Baltimore skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. Inside this room, a notorious crime lord and a dying woman held hands like teenagers discovering touch for the first time. Victor visited 3 more times that week, then every other day, then daily. He told himself he was monitoring his investment, ensuring the money wasn't being wasted, checking on Emma's well-being, because she was an innocent in all this. He manufactured reasons that had nothing to do with the way Sarah's face lit up when he walked into her room, or the way their conversations stretched longer each visit, or the way his chest felt lighter when he was near her. Emma adored him. The little girl who'd marched into his office and called him mean now followed him around like a devoted puppy whenever he came to visit. She told him about her days with Maria, showed him her schoolwork, asked him questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether her mommy would really get better. "She will," Victor promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "She's strong. Like you. You love her." Emma said it matter-of-factly, not a question but a statement of obvious truth. Victor had been reaching for a crayon to help with her coloring. He froze. "What? You love Mommy. I can tell." Emma looked up at him with those knowing eyes that seemed impossibly old. "It's okay. I won't tell if you're not ready." "I'm not. That's not." Victor stumbled over words like a teenager caught in a lie. "I'm helping her. That's different." "Nah." Emma went back to coloring, completely unbothered by his denial. "You look at her the way the prince looks at the princess in my fairy tale books. All soft and worried and happy at the same time. Out of the mouths of children." Victor couldn't deny it anymore. not even to himself. Somewhere between throwing away that resume and sitting beside Sarah's hospital bed, he'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with a woman he barely knew. Not the careful, calculated relationships he'd had before. Brief affairs with women who wanted his money or power, transactions disguised as connection. This was something else entirely. Something terrifying and consuming and absolutely impossible to control. He loved her courage. The way she faced death without bitterness. Her fierce devotion to Emma. The gentle way she spoke even when the pain must have been unbearable. The intelligence that sparkled in her eyes during their conversations. The strength that existed without violence, without dominance, without any of the things he'd always associated with power. She made him want to be better. Not different. He was still Viktor Kozlov, still capable of terrible things, still operating in the shadows. But better within that context. Kinder. More human. She made him remember that somewhere under the monster he'd become, there was still a man who could feel things beyond anger and ambition. 8 weeks into Sarah's treatment, Dr. Chen called Viktor with news that seemed impossible. The tumors were shrinking dramatically. Sarah's body was responding to the therapy better than anyone had hoped. If the progress continued, she might achieve full remission. Viktor called Sarah immediately. "I know," she said, and he could hear the tears in her voice. "Dr. Chen just told me. Viktor, I'm going to live. I'm going to see Emma grow up. I'm going to." Her voice broke into sobs, not of grief but of overwhelming joy. "I know," Viktor said, his own voice rough. "I know. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. For believing. Don't thank me." Viktor cut her off. "You did this. Your strength. Your refusal to give up. All I did was open a door. You did so much more than that." Sarah's voice steadied. "You gave me hope when I had none. You protected my daughter. You showed up day after day, even though you didn't have to. She paused. "Can you come visit tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you." Viktor's heart did something complicated in his chest. Of course. The next day, he found Sarah sitting up in bed for the first time since her admission. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her hair, though still thin from treatment, had been brushed. She wore her own clothes instead of the hospital gown. A simple blue sweater that made her eyes seem brighter. She was beautiful. "You look human again?" Sarah finished with a small smile. "I feel human again. It's amazing what not actively dying does for your complexion." Viktor laughed. Actually laughed, something he couldn't remember doing in years. "I was going to say beautiful, but human works too." Sarah's smile faltered slightly, turning more serious. "Sit down, please." Viktor obeyed, his chest tight with something that felt suspiciously like nervousness. Sarah reached out and took both his hands in hers. Her grip was stronger now, steadier. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it," she began. "I know what you are, what you do. I'm not naive enough to think a man in your position got there through kindness and good intentions." Viktor started to pull away, but Sarah held tight. "I don't care," she continued. "I've seen who you are with Emma, how gentle you are with her, how patient. I've seen who you are with me, showing up day after day, sitting here for hours, talking about everything and nothing. I've seen your heart, Viktor, and whatever darkness exists in your world, it doesn't exist here. Not with us. Sarah, I love you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. "I fell in love with the man who came to my apartment when he had no reason to. The man who held my hand while I went through hell. The man who made my daughter feel safe and loved. I love you, and if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then we need to talk about what happens next." Viktor's world tilted on its axis. "You can't love me. You don't know. I know enough." Sarah's eyes held his, unflinching. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm just asking if you love me back." The truth burst from Viktor like a confession. "Yes. God, yes. I love you so much it terrifies me. I don't know how to do this, how to be this person, how to love someone without destroying them, but I..." Sarah pulled him forward and kissed him. It was gentle and fierce and tasted like tears and hope. Viktor's hands came up to frame her face, careful not to hurt her, terrified she might disappear if he held too tight. When they broke apart, Sarah was crying and smiling at the same time. "We'll figure it out. Together. I can't promise you a normal life. I don't want normal. I want you. I can't promise to always be good. I don't want perfect. I want real." Viktor rested his forehead against hers. I can promise to protect you and Emma with everything I have. To love you both fiercely. To be the best man I can be for you, even if that man is still dangerous. Then that's enough. Sarah kissed him again, softer this time. That's more than enough. 3 months later, Sarah was discharged from the hospital in full remission. Dr. Chin called it a miracle. Victor called it Sarah's stubborn refusal to abandon her daughter. Sarah called it love, giving her a reason to fight harder than cancer could kill. They got married in a small ceremony with only Emma and Maria present. Victor wore his usual black suit. Sarah wore a simple white dress that Emma had helped pick out. Emma was the flower girl and the ring bearer, and the most enthusiastic guest all at once. Victor bought them a house. Not a mansion that screamed his wealth, but a comfortable home in a good neighborhood with a yard where Emma could play. Sarah went back to school part-time to finish her degree. Emma thrived with the stability, the safety, the knowledge that her mommy wasn't going to leave her. And Victor. Victor became something he never thought possible. A husband, a father figure, a man who came home to dinner and laughter and love instead of silence and solitude. He didn't leave his world behind. Couldn't really. He was still Victor Kozlov, still running operations that existed in legal gray areas and occasionally black ones. His enemies didn't disappear because he'd fallen in love. The violence of his world didn't magically evaporate. But now he had something worth protecting that wasn't power or money. Now he had a reason to be careful, to be smart, to ensure that his two worlds never collided. He built walls between his family and his business, fortifications that would make it impossible for anyone to use Sarah or Emma as leverage. Anyone who even looked at his family wrong disappeared, quickly and quietly. Victor Kozlov had always been dangerous, but now he was dangerous with purpose beyond profit. He was a man who would burn down the world to protect the people he loved. Emma called him Papa 6 months after the wedding. Victor had been reading her a bedtime story when she'd casually dropped the word into conversation like it was the most natural thing in the world. He'd frozen, the book slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers. "Is that okay?" Emma had asked, suddenly uncertain. "Maria said I could if I wanted to, but if you don't want me to." Victor had pulled her into a hug so tight she'd squeaked. "It's perfect," he'd managed past the lump in his throat. "I'd be honored." Sarah had been watching from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. That night, lying in bed with his wife's head on his chest, Victor had marveled at how completely his life had transformed. From a man who felt nothing to a man who felt everything. From a monster in expensive suits to someone's papa. From a person who lived in the darkness to someone who had found his light. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked sleepily. "That I threw away your resume without looking at it. And if I'd looked at it, I would have seen just another desperate applicant. I would have rejected you through normal channels. I never would have met Emma. Never would have come to your apartment. Never would have." He paused, still amazed by it all. "Never would have found you." Sarah propped herself up to look at him. "So you're saying Emma barging into your office and calling you mean was the best thing that ever happened to you?" "Yes. She's going to be insufferable when she finds out she was right about everything." Victor laughed, pulling his wife back down into his arms. Let her be insufferable. She earned it. Outside their window, the city lights glittered like fallen stars. Inside their home, the 3 people who shouldn't have been a family slept peacefully, bound together by chance and courage, and a little girl's desperate love. Victor Kozlov had built an empire on fear. But he'd built something far more valuable on hope. And unlike power or money or control, this was something no one could ever take away. 2 years after Emma had walked into his office with a crumpled resume and tears streaming down her face, Victor stood in their backyard watching his daughter play while his wife tended her garden. Sarah's hair had grown back, thick and healthy. Her laugh came easily now, no longer shadowed by pain or fear. Emma was 8 years old and thriving, her report cards covered in gold stars and her smile permanently bright. Sometimes Victor still woke in the night, terrified this was all a dream. That he'd wake up alone in his empty penthouse, that Sarah would be nothing but a ghost, that Emma's voice calling him Papa would fade into silence. But then Sarah would murmur in her sleep and curl closer, or he'd hear Emma patting down the hall to crawl into bed between them. And he'd know this was real. Real and precious and fragile in ways his empire had never been. "Papa," Emma called from her swing. "Watch how high I can go." Victor watched, his heart full in a way he'd never imagined possible. The ruthless crime boss who'd made grown men beg for mercy was terrified of his 8-year-old daughter going too high on a swing. The man who'd orchestrated operations across 3 states worried about Emma's math homework and whether she was happy at school. Sarah came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "That I almost sent her away." Victor's voice was quiet. "I almost threw her out of my office without a second thought. If I'd been just a little more cruel, a little more committed to my own coldness. But you weren't." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Something in you recognized something in her. That's not luck, Victor. That's who you really are underneath everything else." "I'm not a good man." "No," Sarah agreed, turning to smile at him. "But you're a good father, a good husband, a good man to us. And that's all that matters." Emma jumped off the swing at the peak of its arc, landing in the grass with a triumphant whoop. Victor's heart stopped for the second it took her to pop back up, grinning and unharmed. Did you see? Did you see?" She ran toward them, all energy and joy and life. "I saw." Victor swept her up, making her squeal with delight. "You're going to give me a heart attack one day." "No, I'm not. You're too strong." Emma patted his cheek with complete faith. "You're my papa. Nothing can hurt you." Victor looked at his wife over their daughter's head. Sarah's eyes were soft, full of love and understanding. She knew the truth, that Victor was more vulnerable now than he'd ever been, that love had given him everything and made him terrified of losing it. But she also knew he'd fight like hell to protect it. "Nothing can hurt me," Victor repeated, meaning it, because he was Victor Kozlov. He'd climbed to the top of the most dangerous world imaginable. And if anyone thought they could threaten his family, they'd discover exactly how ruthless a man could be when protecting the people he loved. The little girl who'd walked into his office crying had saved him. The dying woman who'd looked at him without fear had redeemed him. Together, they'd transformed a monster into a man. And Victor would spend the rest of his life making sure he deserved them.